This afternoon's Dharma talk is titled, well, the abbreviated form is N. N. Isn't that what I gave you? No. I think if you bring it out a little bit, it's actually noticing, not noticing. So it could be seeing, not seeing, smelling, not smelling. But noticing, not noticing works pretty well. We're actually addressing the way ignorance works. You can't find ignorance. You can find passion of the three poisons. You can find grasping, desiring, wishing, craving, lusting. You can find that. You can also find that other kind of passion that goes the other way. It says, well, it's not that way. Well, it shouldn't be that way. They shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. No one should be doing that. This is a passion that's a little bit more, shall we say, intricate, harder to track. Don't track it. And then, of course, aggression, which is the more obvious kind of everything from rage to just, what is that word the psychoanalysts use? Passive-aggressive. You know, where you just kill somebody, but you pretend you didn't. Is that what passive-aggressive is? Give me a definition of passive-aggressive. Where are my counselors at? I don't have any counselors here. Oh, there's one.
Passive-aggressive. You pretend like you're being nice, but you're really being a jerk.
I like that. Kind of like I'm doing.
I don't know if that really merits a response.
Yeah. Yeah, good example. Wow, I'm so hurt. Very good, yeah. We should do more role playing. Okay. I'm on the time. I'm teaching. Listen. No. So the passion, aggression, ignorance, it's very hard to track those because the word that points to passion, the word that points to aggression, and the word that points, or the concept that points to, excuse me, ignorance or distraction, we kind of settle for that rather than go in and actually look at it. As I said before, don't track it down, but don't look away from it. It's right on the surface. What you're looking for is always right in front of you. This is called direct perception. Might as well start somewhere. Let's start right at the beginning. Let's start right at the end, because those two are not separate. If you don't understand that conceptually, then listen. If you don't understand that directly or with your awareness, then listen. Or do something else. So noticing that we don't notice. What I'm speaking about here is, and everyone has had a different version or different variety of this, is we begin to notice, especially through the awareness practice, the sitting practice of meditation. Without the sitting practice of meditation, I'm not saying you couldn't see this or be aware of this, but it may not happen, and it may happen and be noticed, but it won't be included in your overall life, in the way in which you're operating, in the way in which you're being sincere, the way in which you're being insincere, the way in which you're grasping at some things and rejecting others, and the way in which you're not only mistreating yourself, but you're mistreating others. The biggest mistreatment of others is to mistreat yourself. Don't do it. Give yourself a break. No, when I say no, I know you can't help but do some of this, but I'm saying no. Again, I know you can't help it, but don't judge anything. Come to no conclusion. You don't need to conclude anything at all. Conclusions that are necessary will be foisted upon you just by the causes and conditions that arise as pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination, the basic teaching of the Buddha. Nothing comes from its own side as a separate being, self, other. Well, we can think about that, we can talk about it, we can parse it out, and we can hear other people speak about that in ways that go beyond me. I'm not very scholarly in that way. But if you see this, you don't need it. I mean, if you see this and you wish to convey it to others, which is what I'm endeavoring to do, I'm saying you have everything you need. Everything you're looking for is in front of you, always. It's just that our preconceptions, our ideas, our assumptions, the fancy word is parikalpita. Our imaginary nature blocks it out of fear. We're afraid to see the truth. And why? Because the truth is very, very threatening to the assumed self-centeredness we call the ego, or in the Yogacara tradition, the seventh consciousness. So the noticing of not noticing, or the notice the way we're distracting ourselves, or the noticing of that is about awareness. It's always, you'll hear me say, if you listen to me very much, it's always about awareness. It's not about success and failure. There may be some success, it's always relative. There may be some failure, it's always relative. When something like that comes up, because the self-centeredness is greedy for assurance, greedy for being affirmed. And if that doesn't work, it'll even be greedy for being denied or pushed away or judged, or I'm a terrible person, I'm never going to do this. I can't understand this. I can't understand. So when I say study the traditional text that we study, I say often, I'm saying here, it's not about understanding. It's not about understanding. It's about studying. About study. Work with it in such a way that the awareness that you're working with, you're training by doing sitting practice of meditation, shikantaza, sit down, hold still, all the senses are open, watch what moves. What moves is the way in which you are avoiding, the way in which you are not noticing the not noticing. You're actually shutting down. You may have to do a lot of shutting down before you begin to see the way in which that works, and the way in which it, to use a common metaphor, the way in which it gets its fuel, the way in which it gets some kind of energy from somewhere. To see the fuel line is what is necessary, and the only way you can find the fuel line is to look right at the texture, right at the distraction, the ignoring, the not noticing itself. And so you have to notice that you're shutting down. You can see that walking from here to the kitchen, going to the parking lot. As you walk across the lawn with some goal in mind, very, very simple, you'll notice that there are huge gaps. It's an interesting area to notice not noticing. It's a very interesting area, because it's like you see something that you don't, or it's like you see something you've shut away from. So there's some area there that you can continue to work with. And this not only happens in the sitting practice of meditation, shikantaza. I was just not noticing you. But it also happens in post-meditation, or when we're moving around. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of sitting practice, a lot of sharpening the blade, sit down, hold still, don't chop anything. Hold still, watch, observe, see, observe, receive. Excuse me, give everything your attention. From my perspective, my understanding, it doesn't matter if it's a daydream. I don't teach, try to train the mind from the point of view of get it to be more tame, in the sense of more calm, more passive, more, I don't teach that way. I'm not saying that that might not be important for some people to work with the mind that way, probably, but generally I would rather teach it by saying, look right at what is happening. And if that's an incredibly wild and crazy sideshow in your mind about whatever, it could be about success, it could be about failure, it could be about foreclosure on your house, it could be about jealousy of some kind that you're not sure what's going on, some kind of heightened paranoia, please. This is a Dharma gate. This is a Dharma gate. This is a, Dharma means truth, gate means something that opens up. It's a Dharma gate for you. So someone else And more in the mundane path might be about getting rid of that, finding out why that happened. Don't ask why. We don't need to know why something happens. Unless you do. And if you do, then that will be, it will be like gravity. You'll just naturally go in that way. But if you're doing it out of your self-centeredness and out of your wish to control everything or be the winner, get ahead, or to restore your self of a sense of pride, then you may use that to that idea of why, because if you can get a because, then we tend to say, oh, okay, it's because of that. It's called, it's kind of the other end of blame. The blame is where you just find somebody who's guilty and point the finger. And it could be this, but it causes a circularity that tends to refuse your fundamental nature, your, as we say in this tradition, your Buddha nature, your awakened nature. Your awakened nature, everywhere I look, I see the Buddha. I don't see the historical Buddha, I see awakening everywhere. You can't come to this talk. Even in the mall, if you go out and you look at the people there, you will see it. You'll see it everywhere. And it's not some kind of fancy woo-woo kind of, excuse me, some kind of a fancy feeling. It's not even an emotion. Emotion is just, it may come along and it may not. It's like flags on a bus. Isn't that a perfect image? The bus may have flags, it may not. I'll give a talk on that someday, so you'll see what the metaphor is about when I figure it out myself. So whatever arises is totally appropriate. Totally appropriate. Everything will fit if you just stop trying to make something happen, make something stop happening. Passion, aggression, and turn away from the inevitable, which is your life, your thought patterns. Please use, when I say use, whatever's happening in your mind, make no, as it says in the sutra, pardon my throat, a hair's breadth deviation will fail to accord with the proper attunement. I think I'm paraphrasing it. And proper attunement is a very intense metaphor for thinking you can control something or adjust something, but have to say it some way. So we say, whatever's arising, don't deviate. Don't add, don't subtract, don't divide, don't look away, don't do anything with it. Do no math whatsoever. There's plenty of time to do math some other time. Your opportunity will arise soon, when it's appropriate. And then. No. Don't quote me. Was that a Nara? Oh. I knew I'd reach him. So the idea there is to work with that in your, especially in post-meditation, in things that are happening, interactions with others. Notice the way you will be listening to someone and then you'll totally miss 3 words or 4 words or a whole sentence. And it's a little embarrassing because the person is looking for maybe a response. It's a conversation, so they might want a response. But notice the way that areas of our experience drop out. It's happening to me now, or I couldn't talk about it. It happens to me all the time. Or I could not talk out of that and understanding. Please don't repair that. Don't repair anything. Don't fix anything. Don't go in with some kind of mentality. When I say don't do it. It's kind of simple. Isn't that spelled D-O-N''T? Is that right? I'm sometimes not clear whether a word needs an apostrophe or not. It does? Okay. So you'll notice that when you're doing sitting meditation, sitting practice of meditation, sit down and receive what's happening in your sensorium, all of your sense fields. Just receive whatever's coming, whatever's If it's going, let it go. If it's coming, let it come. And when I say let, don't even do that much. Just don't interfere with anything. If you want, the hard work is just getting your butt to the cushion. Because the ego, the self-centered mind, doesn't want to be observed. It wants to look like it wants to be observed. A little bit of propaganda happening there in that area of the self-centeredness. But to actually go and sit down and do nothing for hours on end, to ego is going to seem like a waste of time, especially if there's no method. I mean, other than sit down, hold still, observe. That's the method. And whatever arises is, if you reflect on your all of the choicelessness that has happened since your birth date, go look in the mirror and say, where did I get this nose? Where did I get this head? Where did I get this sexual orientation, this level of intelligence, anything that's showing up as the body, and even in the mind complex? How did that come about? Excuse me, you can't track that because, as I've said many times and has been said by other teachers, the source is just too complicated. Tributary stream flowing in the darkness. It's just, you can't find it, you can't track it down. Cause and effect. Effect doesn't own a cause. It looks like cause and effect, but look closely. It's like looking in a beehive. Only that would be simple because you can actually track the bees. Is that a good metaphor?
It's not a fish metaphor, so I don't know.
What? The what?
It's not a fish metaphor, so I wouldn't know.
It's not a fish metaphor, so you wouldn't know. Okay. I'll return to the fish soon. So noticing, you could actually, that could be, and I don't teach much by way of post-meditation, mainly it's meditation that I emphasize. Post-meditation, I say, just live your life, hang out, stop judging, correcting, evaluating anything, just don't do it. Be a failure. You're not going to hear that too often. But I can't say that to everyone, but if you're in this room and in this particular place and time, why am I saying it? I'm saying so that you can see the way in which you've been protecting something that you really probably need to be aware of, so that your entire life, not this life, but all the lives that you've ever come out of. And again, as I say over and over, just so you don't think I'm promoting anything because I want to control your thoughts, I don't believe in that. I don't believe or disbelieve. It's not a matter of believing in past lives or disbelieving. It's going to be whatever it is, whatever we do with it. So watch what occurs. If you can see something occur without naming it, without judging it, evaluating it, putting it in a category, doing anything with it, then you see more clearly what that fundamental situation is in and of itself. And of course, the fundamental realization is to see that everything is dependently arisen, that there's no separate there's things that are separated, but the fundamental understanding that can be seen in the awareness, in the consciousness, is to see fundamentally that nothing is separate from anything else, that is dependently arisen. It's powerful. And all of the things the conventional things we've been grasping at, like time, like the past, or like a future, the imputation, all that just all the energy comes out of that. I'm not saying it's not there as a concept, but you can't go to the future, and you can't go to the past. For one thing, you've never left either one. Those are concepts. It's always this. It's always right now. I'm not writing a science fiction book. It's always now. And if you grasp it, you'll miss it. There's no one to grasp anything. Questions are appropriate if you have them.
When you talk about noticing, not noticing, it seems like you're talking about beginning to see ignorance.
Yes.
I was just wondering, is clarity different than seeing ignorance?
Clarity is ignorance from the point of view of using it as a dynamic where you're trying to be more clear. Don't do that. The way if you want to become more clear, I'm saying this very relatively, you have to just look at the ignorance. If you want to go out a door, if you want to go outside, you have to look at the closed door. You can't just look outside.
When you look at ignorance, does that ever resolve into clarity, or is it just a matter of the ignorance becoming more and more sharp?
Paraphrase yourself.
Does looking at ignorance develop into some sort of insight that is different than the ignorance itself?
It may. More. Andrew.
Is ignorance the same thing as confusion?
The concept would point to the same situation. Being confused, ignoring. But specifically, what is it? What area are you referring to? Because you can call ignorance wisdom, because it's a relative situation that's not separate from its opposite. You can't have clarity without ignorance. Those are concepts. And we get trapped by them. Because they're so magnetic. We're onto something. No, we're not. The imputation of a being that is onto something, or a being that can fail, or a being that can win, is running the whole show. That it's not like an active belief, like I believe that. It's something that is it's just hard to see that as something that is an occurrence that we're trying to do, or we're fueling in some way. That's why it seems to be so necessary to look at the functioning itself. Use the concepts to get to the cliff, but at some point you've got to jump off the cliff. It feels like that kind of it's not even a letting go, because letting go can be very artificial and can be, you could describe how much you let go. Probably not going to work.
How does the sitting meditation change if it's not a progression?
So there's all kinds of teachings that talk about progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. It's all over the place, especially in the Tibetan tradition. So, and it's not that isn't happening, and that you need some stair steps. You need the stair steps to see that there's no stairs. So I'm not trying to be confusing or weird or difficult, but you need to work with the concepts so you can see what they are, so that at some area, or maybe it's a point, so that you can see that it's always been the case. You need to use that.
When we're actually sitting on the cushion and looking at our mind, is there a transformation of the content or the relationship?
Say more.
I'm just thinking about watching the content of the mind and
Okay.
the neurosis.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if through meditation that progresses or changes.
It could, but it could also lead you into other areas where it's more like the circus. I quite often talk about the merry-go-round. Looks like a straight line, circular. If you see the circle, then you're not on it. If you can see that it's circular. But if you're in the circle, it looks like you're headed somewhere. You have a goal, you're getting something done, you're accomplishing something. So this is why it seems to be so important to hold still and watch what moves, so that you can see the circularity of the way the mind works to grasp, reject, and shut down. Those are the three simple ways. And then at some point, it's not even a point, we begin to look at the observer. We can't find the observer, but not finding an observer is premature. I wouldn't necessarily go to that kind of a practice, although there are practices that teach that, which are very traditional practices, we were talking about earlier of Atmavichara, Ramana Maharshi's self-inquiry practice works in that way. You could teach that, but you'd have to go talk to Ramana.
Is it best to let that happen, that expansion of the awareness into observing that which thinks it's seeing? Is it best to let that occur spontaneously, or should we try to begin to look?
Yeah. The only thing you need to try is get to the cushion, sit down, hold still, and observe what continues to rotate so that you can see the rotation. So you can see how it starts, how it runs along for a while, and then it comes back to square one again, and it's circular. A simple example is just watch your feelings. One day you feel good, next day you don't feel so good. And then we impute or attribute reasons for that. We actually deliberately connect up because of this. I'm not getting enough water. It's because of what my neighbor said. And then when we don't have it, when we have a difficult feeling, we don't know why it's there, then we might call it depression or so many different ways of instead of actually using that as an opportunity to go down into that. When I say go down and just watch the surface of it. You can't go into something unless you look at the surface. You have to look at the surface. Because if you go down into it without looking at the surface, then you're going out down into it with your conceptual mind, which is a wonderfully convincing situation. Warren?
When the type of observation that you're talking about, is that something that we could actually acknowledge in the sense of saying, yeah, I really observed my mind a lot today in meditation?
If you said that, then you're ignoring.
So the type of observation you're talking about, is it something that can even be recognized, or is it? Well,
yeah, go ahead. I'm just taking a breath.
I'm just wondering if the observation is something that's occurring spontaneously, and we tend to get in the way by trying to identify how we're observing.
So it's the getting in the way that we begin to see that there's some kind of obstruction. We notice that we're not noticing. We have some kind of, it's a via negativa. It's a negative way of seeing it. It's not a positive, I'm getting somewhere. It's not a positive, that tends to resonate more with the physical existence of being in three-dimensional space and having the apparent situation of time and the past and the future and so on. Robert?
I guess I developed the second question. And the second question was, if you're practicing and you have an insight and you believe your insight, is that a way of missing the circularity? The insight, say an insight about yourself or about somebody else. If you believe it, then you're missing something else.
Yeah. Anytime anything occurs, an insight occurs, do nothing with it. No congratulations, no belief, no disbelief, no looking away. Don't do anything. And the only way you can do that is to not know what it is. When I say not know, it's not a deliberate not knowing, but it's a willingness to look at the texture, the feeling, the furriness, the roughness, the jaggedness, or the colorful. It's almost like another kind of feeling where you don't know what's going on.
And you can't exhaust that with your conceptual mind.
Pardon me?
Seeing and feeling the texture,
yeah.
You can't exhaust that with your conceptual mind. It's beyond your.
Yeah, you can't. You can't.
Thoughts.
No, you can't exhaust that. No. You can't. Yeah.
Other
Shannon.
question? Oh, could I do? Oh, sorry.
We'll come back, Shannon.
So would you say looking at the texture of things would you say that is the best way to work with, say, if you're experiencing intense fear or suffering, to not go into creating, making that into negativity that you're using against yourself?
I would say that I would, I can't be everybody, so I'm not positive, but I would say that if you're strengthening the awareness by doing sitting meditation, if you're already sharpening that blade, then when you come to that kind of situation, that awareness that is a receiver, that receives what's happening rather than adds on to and comments. The tendency to comment on things is what gets in the way, and that comes from fearful of not knowing what that is, or if it's going to hurt us, or if it's harmful. So I would say, yes, basically to work with that if you can. But everyone is put upon by all kinds of karma, or some people don't even know what depression is, and other people, they don't know what depression isn't. So they're constantly in some kind of state of intense, angst or anxiety about their life and who they are, and there's no reason for it. It's just, it makes it even more horrible. It can be terrible. I couldn't talk about it if I hadn't had a little taste of it. And what I'm saying is if you use that, go into that, and the way, how do we go into it? We look at the surface. And how do we look at the surface? It's right in front of you. And when it's right in front of you, it looks like, well, I don't know what that is, and that's it. I don't know what that is. To add on any kind of concept or analysis or rotation around that tends to be cover up what needs to be seen. And don't believe a word I say. What I'm saying is not to be believed in, but I'm just saying, look at it. Each person's body-mind complex is functioning in a different way. So the most important thing that I think I could say to you is awareness is more important than what arises in it. What arises in it is materialism. So, and it's very easy to get seduced into or sucked into an event or a circumstance or a win, or some kind of a winning feeling, some kind of accomplishment. Whew, I'm glad I got that taken care of. It's not wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. That's terrible, incorrect, or something. I'm just saying probably going to continue to suffer if you go in that direction. Robert.
When you said, an effect doesn't own a cause, that really got me. I was thinking, well, and use an example like this nose, this head, or you could say this broken heart, or this addiction.
Yeah. Yes.
Of course, when I see all sorts of causes, but when you say an effect doesn't own a cause, is it that there's so many of them, or
yeah, it's 15 or 20. 15 or 20. I mean, sometimes it's dozens. I'm endeavoring to be humorous. I'm just saying it's countless. Any one thing that occurs, we impute because we want control of everything. We give it a name, an identity. We bring everything in, but that's gone. Something arises and it's gone, and the causes and conditions, as I sometimes say, this piece of wood, that piece of wood, the two hands that brought them together, the human being that has these two hands, unsearchable, because we always look for causes, because we want to attribute blame or attribute credit. We want to know, if we can do that, then somehow maybe we can be the ones who get ahead or rise above the fray or have eternal life or something.
Is there an ignorance that doesn't depend on passion and or aggression?
There's a teaching called the Ignorance Born Within, that talks about the fundamental avidya, or the Tibetan is marikpa, or there's a fundamental quality that's taught. I don't know. It's something I was taught, something I've contemplated. So I think probably, but it would probably be ignorant of me to disagree with that. What do you think? Any ideas?
Well, it just seems when passion and aggression or anything arises in the mind, that's a form of ignorance.
I would agree. Yeah, you can't. They're always, the gang of three. They're always working together. One comes out, and then one. And you'll notice in your life, if someone gets mad, then instead of just watching the anger fade away into nothing, and we immediately go into passion and justify it, feel sorry for it, or apologize for being mad. And then we go back into, what's the other one? Ignoring. And then, so then what happens again? We get mad again. Or it can go the other way around. That's a very interesting area that happens quite often in, what do they call those? Marriages. Yeah. And not necessarily, but could happen, yeah. Hakaran?
What is the observer if not awareness?
It is awareness. It's a way of talking about it. And when we say observer, who was it? The teacher back in the 50s that I was reading way before I even got into Buddhism was Jiddu Krishnamurti, who said the observer is the observed. Said that what you're looking at is the observer, and there's different ways of looking at that. You could say that it's the observer because you are imputing the parikalpita. You're taking dependent origination, or paratantra, the dependently arisen, and you're projecting your ideas onto that. So it's you in the sense that you're doing it. You're saying it's a bad table, it's a good table, it's a nice person, a bad person, a correct person, an incorrect person, a great teacher, a terrible teacher. Projecting onto that, but if you look deeply into that, it's still you're still not separate from it, because then you see that it's you. That it's not just your projection, but the very thing you're looking at, that table, your consciousness is not separate from that. This is a table. This is a human being. I'm not interchanging them to be cute. I'm saying that the fundamental understanding goes way beyond. This is called compassion. And compassion is not a feeling. It's not feeling sorry for someone, or it's a fundamental understanding that nothing is separate. Just one. I don't mean to be fancy here, but there's a fundamental understanding that sees that deeply, and the path part of it is to put everyone before yourself. This is the Bodhisattva path. Save all beings. Yes.
What differentiates an insight from an opinion?
The opinion is a construct that you gather little things around it called I believe it, I believe this, I believe that part, and this works because of this. So it's an idea about something. You actually abandon what you have the opinion about. If you have an opinion about anything, it's just your little construct. Opinions are untrue, just untrue. The very nature of an opinion is untrue. So the insight, what's the difference between the two? The insight would be something you're not exactly sure what that is, but there's some kind of quality of understanding that may be arising there. Like understanding, seeing that there's no self in the skandhas, that the form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness, that when you look at those, that they're there, but they don't. You're starting to see that there's nothing solid there, even though you know you're here and you're seeing, smelling, tasting, touching. But you can see that there's no one actually doing that. You start to have that insight. It's not an opinion, particularly. I mean, it could graduate into one if you can't stand the not knowing. If you start to go into the construction of that and start to attach to the construction of the teaching, rather than remain in the insight. More? Did I answer your question? All right. Shannon.
So if we were able to look at just the texture of things, of experiences, or feelings or whatever, without creating a story about it or turning it into some kind of aggression,
Yes.
could we call that happiness?
Well, it's not a basket full of mice. Is it? Does it feel like I'm arguing with you? So, I mean, you could call it anything, but what you're actually living with your sense. You're no longer separate from your senses. The consciousness that has been trying to stay away and stay up into the thinking process and stay away from touch, smell, taste, hearing. You're actually embodied. You're not missing your life. You're fundamentally here. You know that there's only a limited time here, and you completely enjoy yourself. And that enjoyment includes everything. It includes headaches. It includes bowel movements. It includes claustrophobia. It includes opinions that tend to rise and try to find a space or find a space on the bookshelf. textures everywhere. Someone who is in the arts, people tend to stumble into that because of their idealism and their desire to create and be somebody, and a lot of it is ego driven initially until they start to actually get into the depth of their creation. And then the self-centeredness that motivated that starts to fall away because they're makes me want to weep. They're completely overtaken by the reality. Pardon me. It's called poetry, called the arts. This is why people who create are so, they may not meditate, but they're so dedicated. Picasso, Robert Motherwell, Bach, Kierkegaard. There was a poet.
Joy from Traverse City has a question.
Yes.
She asks, when you become aware that you have been on the train of thought, it seems hard to look at the fuel line. What should we notice at that moment of returning to awareness?
Well, if you say you've returned, then that's extra. That's an addition onto. That's kind of a keeping track. So the fundamental understanding would be there's no difference in those. So to separate anything out as so that you can get back to awareness is a misunderstanding. But you know, it has to be seen. You have to see it, and each person. That's why it's not about believing anything. It's not about disbelieving anything. It's about fundamentally seeing this, not thinking it, and not feeling it, but just seeing it. You have to see it here. Mm-hmm.
Shoto has a question from next door.
He's supposed to be sick.
He asks, what does it mean to remain in the insight?
A simple way of saying it is to not know what's going on. The ego mind cannot stand to be in no person's land. Doesn't want to be in between a rock and a hard place. The awakened mind doesn't care. It's not inviting anything. It's not rejecting anything. It's not shutting down anything. It's not separate from anything. You can only reject something if you think it's somehow separate and needs to get further away. You can only grasp if you think something is farther away and you need more of it. Aggression, passion, or the other one is ignoring if it seems to be threatening in some way. If you see what this is, you don't want anything. You don't want anything else, I should say. Like it says in the back of your rock suit, nothing else. There isn't anything else but this. And it's always this. And it's, whether this body comes and goes is none of your business. And you could say to me, well, we'll see about that. Wait till you get on your deathbed, I'm going to come and talk to you. Let me just see. How's that feeling there, Sokuzan? Getting ready to leave the planet. I think you got about 15 minutes. So let me hear you teach. Please come and do that. I'll be waiting for you. Go ahead.
From Gary Huey up in Traverse City.
Yes, Gary.
He asks, is the one who notices or observes not noticing just a more complex or sneaky kind of ego?
That could be. It doesn't matter. I mean, because to find just a more sneaky kind of ego is, it might feel somehow like some kind of progress, but it's probably circular. I mean, it'll probably take you in another trajectory, and then you'll have to ask another question about it. And in your case, Gary, yeah, it's probably happening. He always liked me to teach very directly, too. Other questions?
question. An example of driving and not noticing that you're driving and coming back to being driving. What is observing when you're not noticing? What's keeping you on the road?
That's interesting. It's just, I think it just is an example of how incredible consciousness is. And consciousness works much better without a self. Because it's not the self, or the ego mind, which the self-centered mind, is trying to get its way and trying to strategize. And a little bit of that works as long as things are fairly balanced. I mean, you can drive and you can go somewhere and you can turn the corner, but the mind that is, you could say, all pervasive, that doesn't have an agenda behind it or a self behind it, doesn't miss much. So, there's probably 15 or 20, if not hundreds, of different ways that consciousness is working as someone is driving. There's so many things, just like the car itself, there's so many things that have to work exactly right for that entire thing to be, a vehicle. They all have to work, and same thing in this human being. So many things have to work for us to even drive a car or even walk across the room. We totally, as a common way of saying that, we totally take all that for granted. And we just impute that there's somebody and something and a body, and we're in a car and we're going somewhere, and then noticing, not noticing, that's a good example, because that is a time when, once you start to drive, you've all noticed how you can kind of just drive and daydream. You can think about anything, as long as there's a road and there's dots, whatever those are, call them stripes? Yeah, stripes. And there's things going by like this. If they're doing like this, you're in the wrong country. So I think it's just a matter of just staying with that whole sensorium and not particularly focusing too much. This is what happens when people do a shine practice or a shamatha practice, is to go down and actually focus on particular things. That's not wrong, but a little bit of that would be fine, but to do too much of that, we tend to start to get stuck in some kind of a success thing about trying to stay on something. And I think that can also happen with other things like driving, possibly, where we get too wrapped up in that. More?
Is there still awareness during the not noticing?
Yes. It just doesn't have a self. It doesn't have an idea about it. Eventually, my way of talking about it's a very kind of literal, but it's like the allegiance. The allegiance that we have to anything changes over. It's like it changes over from the thought patterns, the emotions, the feelings, the memories. It goes from that to the space in which those things occur. That's kind of a metaphoric. It's like your mind becomes like the sky instead of like clouds. And the sky doesn't do anything. It's just there, and things come and go within the sky. If you're identified with the forms that are coming and going, suffering. And those forms are very subtle. There's the body form, and then there's all the thought forms, and the mind, and the emotions, and the ideas. And we get trapped by things that are 3,000 years ago. They're showing showing up here, right in this room, right now. And I'm not talking necessarily about a life you had in ancient Egypt, necessarily. I'm not going to go there with some kind of a story about it. I mean, you could do that, but it seems to be more vast and profound and disconnected than that. It doesn't really show up as individuals. It has to be seen, and I don't know how else to encourage that other than find out who you are. Sit down, hold still, by yourself. Leave here, never come back. Or come back a lot. As I say, don't believe a word I say, but don't ignore it. Go ahead.
What's the difference between hopping on a train of thought as opposed to sitting at the train station watching the trains go by?
So the train is going to go in circles, more than likely. It goes out and it comes back, or you go out on the train and then you come back, and you go out and you come back, and then you watch that. If you use that kind of a metaphor, which I've used on occasion. And the difference is, one, you're on the train, and the other, you're on the station. Oh, you wanted more than that. Go ahead.
we're sitting in front of the wall.
Yes.
So I guess I'm trying to. So if I get caught up in a train of thought,
Yes.
and kind of like the question that came over the phone from Gary, I think, or someone else, but if we're on a train of thought and we realize it, where does that leave you?
Back in the station. So it's not about not doing that. It's always about awareness. It's not about not having any, imaginary, not having any, distraction. It's not about not having, about preventing that. It's about being aware, because that's where you find no self. I mean, if you're going to find the phrase we say, there's no self in the skandhas, there's no solid being anywhere. The only way you're going to find it, it seems, the way I understand it, is to not particularly look for it. Now, there are practices where we look for it, but my understanding is just watch what moves. And it could be your mind going out to the train, it could be coming back here, sitting, waiting. You could be meditating on the cushion, realize you're here, and then you're in a daydream about something that happened at work or a memory, and then you're back here. And just watch that apparent continuity that's going back and forth. And just continue to observe that and observe that and observe that. If you leave that for some kind of something else where it should be another way, this is the second noble truth: wanting things to be different than they are. Buddha said it. As far as we know, life is suffering or dissatisfaction. Everybody down with that? Yeah. And it doesn't say. He didn't say part-time. You have to actually look at this. He's not talking about everybody's got a toothache the rest of their life. He's saying that there's a basic dissatisfaction that's going on by just having consciousness, or whatever this is, downloaded, is my metaphor, for into this physical form for a certain length of time. And so it's about watching that, seeing that, so that you're fundamentally seeing that or receiving that. And at some point, I could say it this way, that which is the path quality is to receive, and the fruition, there's a ground is suffering, the path is look at it, and the fruition is to see that nothing is separate from anything, anywhere. The separation is an illusion. Yes, sir?
What is that baseline dissatisfaction?
What do you mean? I'm just say a little bit more.
I'm not sure. I guess I'm just curious. Yeah,
Me too.
what it is, if it is something, where it comes from.
Can you paraphrase? Because I have no idea what you're talking about. But I'm curious too.
What is it about being in this physical form that presents as unsatisfactoriness?
Well, I think, simply put, it would be just nerve endings. You can find every one of the six sense fields, including the mind, has nerve endings. Some of them are very obvious, fingertips of this feels, this sense organ. The eyes, the ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. The mind has a different kind of, but it's very, very sensitive. That whole area is an incredible situation we find ourselves in. And we're not limited to, what we actually are not limited to being a human being. Just looks like it. And I'm just saying you could be a giraffe. Of course you could be, but it's unlimited to what could show up as appearance. And so the insight was, as you've heard, those of you who have studied the teachings, that what appears is empty of what you think it is. More.
Is that dissatisfaction something like our incapability to receive everything? Like, are those nerve endings a physical constraint?
I don't know. What do you think? I mean, you're asking the question.
I suspect so. I guess that's why I'm asking you.
Could be. I think that's a tunnel of love. You ever been in one of those? Yes, sir. Joseph.
What is the relationship between sitting meditation and Dharma discussion?
Sitting meditation and Dharma discussion?
Yeah, what's the relationship?
Like what we're doing here?
Yes.
One is the intuitive part, which would be looking at the wall, sitting down and practicing, and the other one would be the intellectual or conceptual part, which was this, and they kind of come together. So I have no idea how I do this, and you could even say that's obvious. I'm not able to do this. As I've said before, when I get up to walk in here, I have no idea what I'm going to say, or who I am, or what I'm going to do, or what this is about. I don't have much. I have an agenda to help people. That's it. I want to help people if I can. So that's what I try to do. And it may not be helpful. May be helpful, may not be. More about that?
They feel very different. I guess I'm trying to get at what is going on in the Dharma discussion that's the same as what goes on the cushion.
Because in the Dharma discussion, you're observing what is coming out, what is being said by this person, and you're also observing what as your reactions come up to it. So it's like, I'm your thoughts, and then you add on to them. So I say, don't believe anything I say. So I'm helping you. I'm saying, listen, but it doesn't matter if you're paying attention. Sitting on the cushion does not matter if you understand in some kind of way about how to cook eggs or how to, those kind of, just observe. In the book studies we have, just attend, just be there. And same thing with this situation, just, forget everything I said.
And is asking questions also part of just observe?
Yes, it is. And it depends on it depends on your own understanding of what this is. You may, sometimes I recommend to people who sometimes people come in the Hojo and say, I'd like to ask questions, but I don't know why I can't ask questions. And I say, well, ask on behalf of others. If I'm talking and maybe you have some kind of idea of what I'm saying, and you might have an understanding that maybe I should go this direction or that direction. You might be able to ask a question that would bring out the teachings in a way that would be helpful to others. So you can ask on behalf. There's a book, the Lankavatara Sutra, where Mahamati is, I think it was a Buddha that's saying, that's really good, Mahamati. Thank you for asking that question on behalf of others. I'm paraphrasing. Huh? Bhagavan, the Bhagavan, or the Buddha. So so it could happen like that. I think it's different with each person and where they're at and what their practice is about and how much they're fighting with their mind. Difficult to be genuine. Are we done?
One last question.
Go ahead.
From Mayun over in France. She asks, when poetry becomes the ultimate breath of someone who creates, for example, paints, is there still a painter, someone who is the author of the masterpiece?
No, there never was one. That's a big discovery. I think that's what Picasso was looking for. His biggest fear was death, from what I read about anyway. Boy, he didn't fear that. So yeah, you don't have to have an experience of no self. You don't have to. There isn't going to be something where I used to think I was somebody, but now I've transcended my ego, and it's not going to happen. What it is, it's actual realization that it was never true. So it's not an experience. This is an experience. Gone. You heard it. Now it's gone. Realization is not an experience. That way it can't disappear. You see it, you understand it, you awake to this. You see it. And there's no proof. All evidence is partial. All evidence is relative truth. There is no evidence for the absolute. Simple way of saying transcend this. Not the greatest word, but there it is. You could say go beyond, but you don't have to go beyond because this is the beyond. This is the other world. This is the ultimate. You're in it. You're there. Who you are can't be harmed. I'm not saying your nerve endings can't be abraded, of course. You could have your head chopped off and you could be forced to eat some ice cream that wasn't a good flavor.
With your head chopped off?
Huh?
With your head chopped off?
Who said that?
Me. I
Oh.
can't taste it if your head's chopped off.
Good point, I stand corrected. Your head's chopped off, you can't do that. Yes?
What do you mean, no evidence?
Evidence is partial. The ego's looking for proof that they're doing well or proof that they're doing bad, or there's always some kind of evidence. This is why our society is so weird, because we're looking for reasons, who's bad, who's good, who did well, and they don't, somebody commits a crime and they don't look even a little bit into how the person was raised, who their mother was, and how they were treated. Just a simple kind of looking into, they go right to, you did that, that's the law, so you're in jail. And we know, we talk to people in prisons all the time. It's a horrible, controlled hell realm, if you could have such a thing. So, so evidence, meaning proof of any situation, it's part of the story. So, and a story, it's a story. So but if you see what this is, then there isn't anything else. There's nothing to do, nowhere to go. There isn't anything. Any further questions? Very good, thank you so much.